Do you love the Dreamcast? I love the Dreamcast, and I am on a mission to complete every single game on that system. There are almost 300 official English language releases, so join me on my adventure to see how I get on. The order is randomly chosen, and game number 9 is F1 World Grand Prix. Man, I used to love F1 of this era. In fact, I did own a few F1 games around this time. I can't remember if I had this exact one, but there is a tear of nostalgia bubbling up, alongside some trepidation, because if there is one thing I remember about these games is that they were insanely difficult. Whether it was because I was a kid or that's just how it was, but I don't know, I am slightly worried this is going to be one hell of a challenge. But special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making this happen. If you want to learn more about the best way to support the channel, stick around to the end to see why it's the best Patreon around. Plus, you get to watch these videos earlier. You can watch the next episode like right now. F1 World Grand Prix was originally developed by Paradigm Entertainment, but the Dreamcast version was handled by Video System, published by Sega. In fact, now I am researching it, this was originally a Nintendo 64 game, which I think is the one that I had, or at least I rented it. This Dreamcast version is technically the same game pretty much, but with an updated roster since it released later. So how are we gonna beat it? Well, of the modes available, it seems we'll be taking on the Grand Prix, a full season. I'm absolutely dreading this. Surviving and doing well in one race is one thing, doing it consistently over 16 of them, that's terrifying. We could be here a while, guys. Now, this is based on the 1998 season, so I was like 7 or 8 at this time, although the game did release in like 2000, so, you know, 9, 10-ish. I was an eager watcher of the sport, really. Honestly, you want to know my weekend for like 15 years? Here it is. I would go to my dad's house Saturday morning, I'd play some PS1, some Dreamcast, GameCube games all day long, watch the qualifying for F1, watch Match of the Day at 10 PM, watch a late night movie, which always seemed to be Total Recall somehow, which is awesome. Sunday, wake up, play more games, watch the F1 race, watch Stargate SG-1, more games, go home. That is literally my entire weekend for 15 years. So I do have a lot of nostalgia for the sport, and for this I'm gonna go with my man at the time, who was Mika Hakkinen. Sadly, Nick Heidfeld isn't in this one, but I know from memory Mika Hakkinen was a badass. He was like the champion, right? I can't spell your name, but hopefully I can embody your racing spirit, because I would like to finish first in this game, because he's from Finland. Bet he's never heard that joke before. So we've got 16 tracks to get around, but before that I thought I'd take the game for a quick spin, you know, get to grips with the physics before I ruin the career mode early. Knowing racing AI games back in the day, if I don't win every race, one other person will. So there's going to be little room to balls up. I decided on Spa because it was always a favorite race of mine, always pissing it down with rain. There was always a tasty crash on the first corner, and yes, I am slightly sociopathic because I thought the crashes were awesome, and it's okay for you to admit that too. Okay, it was dangerous and it's not nice to like them, but there's an animal inside me. Anyways, this is what happened. Not an auspicious sign, but let's jump in. I decided to aid my cause with the auto brake because something about my personality makes me not know when to stop. Physically and psychologically, I will take over the world one day, and don't you worry, when I do, Sega, I will force them to remake Skies of Arcadia, and also Konami, Suikoden 6. I got you covered, guys. I might be a ruthless dictator, but I will be an awesome video game publisher as well. And thank God the default races only have 3 laps. Part of me was worried they'd be a full race, as though everyone's got like 2 hours to spare. 3 laps, alright, that's a massive relief. This game tries to give the full weekend experience because not only is there qualifying, which is a given, but there's also 3 highly pointless rounds of practice. Which, you know, that's true for the real thing, but it's hardly necessary for a video game. Yeah, I need to practice. No, I don't need to practice. And now I need to practice again. No, I don't need to practice. Maybe practice some more before the race. For the most part, to save my sanity, I only did 1 full-timed lap of qualifying, but you can do up to 12 if you want to. Sadly, my first attempt in Melbourne landed me in 15th, but with car damage defaultly turned off, I just can kamikaze my way around the track without too much issue here. My driving was most especially ropey, and I would not be granted a license in this, century, but over the course of 3 laps, I bullied my way up the grid. Taking a few ill-advised shortcuts along the way, I managed to take first place on the first corner of the final lap and gingerly drove the rest of it to victory. I suddenly turned into a Sunday driver at this point. This seemed like really easy. Like way easier than I expected. I was dreading this to be like hardcore, but that was deceptively simple. This might be a smoother video than I expected. Next up is Interlagos in Brazil, a classic track with some great sweeping corners like Juncao, but also a couple of brutal hairpins. Everyone loves this track. I didn't have the best qualifying ever, so much so I had to have like a second go of it, but I was still 19th. It's weird how the races are super easy, but qualifying is totally rigged. Same with Aqua GT. So I had more work to do on this one, although the first corner did its best to make it even more difficult. If there's one rule to my driving here, it's that I'm always destined to bugger it up in a race, and it's either going to be the very first corner or the very last corner, both of which are massively painful to my soul. Anyways, ballsing it up in qualifying, and the first corner meant I didn't have enough time to catch up with the leading pack, and so I had to settle for a 4th place finish. Buenos Aires is the third track. That makes sense because it's basically next door. Less travel emission. I mean, good lord, F1 wouldn't want to pump CO2 emissions into the air, would they? Where's the electric cars? Anyways, this is a nice track, but bloody hell is it hard thanks to how thin it is. Hard and thin, which is how any lady would describe me. I didn't know I shared something in common with an F1 track. I did well in qualifying, and out of the blocks, the first corner of the race, I pretty much took first place. I did spin out on the last lap, but I was so far ahead, I could make a cup of tea and a sandwich, and I'd have still won. The AI was not good on this one at all. First again, you know, things are looking good. 4th, we have Imola, which is pretty much the Italian saying, hey, can you just give us another F1 race? We'll pretend it's San Marino, but come on, we're the home of Ferrari. To which the F1 president pocketed the money and obliged. This is another classic track. It's not particularly exciting in terms of its layout, but it's got that Sunday morning F1 feeling. You know that feeling. I thought I was doing mildly okay at qualifying, well, aside from the spin, but there was something bothering me. It was the final chicane on the lap. The car seemed to slow down way too much, like unnecessarily so. The auto brake feature was definitely hindering my experience here, and I was way down the pack. Through sheer determination, I managed to get myself all the way up to 2nd, and I tell you, that is the greatest photo finish in F1 history. I didn't even realize I grabbed 2nd, it was like such a glorious feeling. So morale was pretty high, but one thing is for sure, I couldn't be careless all the time if I wanted to win the championship. If I wasn't winning, Mr. Coulthard was rigged to always win. The next track is Catalunya, which this is the point in the game when I started to notice the braking issue was a bit more serious than I realized. I don't know what it is about this track, but the braking is just off. Braking when there was no need to, like stopping me, actually stopping me from accelerating out of the corner. And even when I thought I did a decent lap without messing up, I was not even close to getting a good time. I tried to look into the options to turn it off, but there was no way to do it once it's selected. You can't change mid-season. I was 20 seconds off the lap record, which is kind of insane. I was last on the grid for qualifying thanks to the auto brake, and the race itself wasn't much better. I was racing fine, but I just could not catch up with the top of the pack, and I finished 4th. I'm keeping my fingers crossed it's just some sort of buggy circuit, and it'll be fine from here on. Right? Welcome to the Monaco Grand Prix, the Grand Prix where you spend more time on your brakes than accelerating. The world famous, perhaps the most famous racetrack in history, and I've got a braking problem. I could immediately see the problems in qualifying, and it's not entirely because I didn't know which way to go. Might be an issue. They definitely need more arrows saying, go this way, don't go that way, you tool. So first, I had to get used to the track, and I could see that this is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than Catalunya. I was definitely being hindered by this damn auto braking. Starting from the back, I tried to make my way up to the top, but after being totally shafted, I made a big call, a big decision. I had to start over again because there is no way I can win this thing with the auto brake enabled. I just can't qualify high enough, and I can't speed around fast enough to catch up to the main racers, especially with only 3 laps. So I wasted 2 hours of my life up to this point. I was starting all over again, this time with Mr. Coulthard, the most middle-class Scottish person to have ever existed. In fact, I hear to this day Scottish people still don't accept him as one of their own. With the auto brake turned off, it was admittedly another learning curve to get used to it not being there. But like my daughter to ice cream, it instantly fell on the floor and I had to buy another one. But eventually it did click and I was in the zone. I was so in the zone, it was too easy. So skipping over what I talked about before, let's go back to Monaco. I easily qualified first without the auto brake. That's insane. That braking cost me at least 15 seconds or more per lap. I crashed almost every lap, but I was doing good, and I'd done so much better compared to the previous attempt. I was just way ahead. So things are looking much nicer. Next is Montreal, for those Canadians who don't speak English, or at least they don't want to. This was always a classic track. The final corner was always a death trap when watching on TV, but it feels quite tame here. Another easy win. Manicourt, the French track. Now this is a really tricky track because yeah, it looks quite tame when looking at the layout, but there's loads of corners that get you off guard, and I must have coated my wheels with slime before this race because it looked like I was auditioning for Dancing on Ice, spinning out everywhere. I just couldn't get a good, normal, mistake-free lap in qualifying, so I started at the back of the pack, believe it or not, and as per usual, 3 laps just wasn't enough to make up for it and I finished third. It's not the end of the world though. Round 9 is the homeboy turf, Silverstone. Why they don't know how to cordon the non-racing parts of the track off, I don't know. It's seriously, this was so hard to know which way to turn. Of course you have a map, but it's not easy to have a quick look at when there's a chicane coming up in a quarter of a second. Good to know it looks as grey as I always remembered. This is British misery, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't have a great race. I finished third. Mostly my own fault though. Race 10 is the A1 ring in Austria. I don't really have any memories of this track when I used to watch F1. I don't know why. Maybe it just never stood out, but playing it for this game is pretty cool. It's like a poor man's Spa. The run up from the grid to the sharp corner, you know, looks ripe for some sweet mechanical carnage. I was first on the grid and it was an easy win overall. Race 11, Hockenheim, another all-time classic of the F1 calendar, but there's quite an issue with this one, and it's more in the game's mechanics than the track itself. It's something that you may or may not have noticed in the footage I've shown you, is that occasionally when you're driving straight, but you want to adjust your direction just a little bit, like maybe you're veering off to one side a bit too much, like you want to straighten up a little bit, you know, that's fine. You can gently adjust with it with, you know, small push of the analog stick, but I'd say like 10% of the time when you do that, the car jerks wildly, way more than normal. And on most tracks, you know, it tends not to be a major issue, but Hockenheim is thinner than the noodles that are currently making their way through my digestive system. You can't afford that jerk here. There's no room for it. So while I did pull through with a win, it wasn't without a struggle. Why would you make a track where you can't fit 2 cars side by side? Do you want overtaking Germany? Next up, the Hungaro Ring, which I'm pretty sure was a new Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet. This track has been around the block a bit, and it's one of the blander tracks out there. Wasn't a fan of this race, to be honest. I'm not sure that's due to me qualifying in 19th, however. On the final lap, I did manage to get first place though. Race 12 is Spa, my all-time favorite track to watch. But it's probably going to be painful to drive on. There's no rain here, so that's super unrealistic. Have they not been to Belgium? And I absolutely failed on qualifying. Not sure I like Spotter anymore. The narrowness kills it because of the occasional jerky controls, but I did still manage to win. Race 13, Monza, the other Italian one. Yeah, by the time they got to this in the calendar year, it was already too late. They'd forgotten about San Marino. This is a cheeky little track because it's got stealth chicanes all over the place. You look at the map, it looks super simple and straight, but these small chicanes, they creep up on you. They caught me by surprise literally every single time. And the jerkiness, oh man, talk about ruining a run. I KO'd myself for the most part, and I'd be surprised if the FIA didn't breathalyze me, you know, after the race was over. I was drunk as a skunk. Next up is the Nürburgring, although when I first read that I thought it said Nuremberg, which was a whole different weekend. The only race there was to get the gallows cleaned up as soon as possible for the next one. Anyways, this is the Luxembourg Grand Prix, even though it's in Germany, because Hockenheim wasn't enough to sate those thirsty German petrol heads. This is a standard track, all things considered. Nice sweeping curves, plenty of chances to get to full speed. And now, the final race. It's here and we're in Japan, Suzuka. This track is pretty cool. I always liked it as a kid, finishing off the season. Race was nice and early too, so I didn't need to get up at 3 AM to watch it. At least, I don't think I did. It was hardly Australia, I'll tell you that. This track feels super arcadey. You barely need to touch the brakes for the most part, and the corners, I mean, okay, they caught me off guard. I really struggle with this track. I qualified 18th, Jesus, and the race itself also wasn't great. I obviously lacked the confidence to power through those corners compared to the AI, but I ended up finishing second, not bad. And thank God it's over. I am the driver's champion, and I'm greeted with a nice end credit sequence. Okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought, even though I did waste 2 hours of my life with that goddamn auto brake. What were you thinking? Did they even test it? Overall, for the time, this would have been a really, belting game, I would say. It definitely lives up to the sim nature of the era, where Gran Turismo was barely getting off the ground, and thankfully it also has an arcade style stuff for those who are cowards like myself. I don't think there was a racing game like this back in the day, and if you like F1, it's a great game, but my review would be, maybe a 7 out of 10 for quality of fun. A few gameplay niggles like the broken auto brake and the random jerks in the steering, they do bring it down. For presentation, I would give it a 6 out of 10. Really, looking at the cars themselves, they don't look great. They're fine, but it's a bit ropey. In terms of difficulty, after a really rough start, it's actually not that difficult at all. I would give it a 5 out of 10. You can't go through casually because you do need to brake, you need to learn the tracks, but it is doable. And there we have it. Are you an F1 fan? Did you play this back in the day? Who was your favorite racer and why was it Nick Heidfeld? If you enjoy these videos, do me a favor, leave a like, and even better, check out my Patreon with the link in the description because you get these videos early and ad-free alongside so many other perks. It's definitely worth it. In fact, you can watch the next episode already. The RNG gods picked Maximum Pool. Oh yeah, maximum excitement for that one. Probably going to be harder than F1 racing. I'm not exactly Ronnie O'Sullivan. Special thanks to my super producers, Alexander Cato, Brent McLean, FF14 Best RPG, JCross7776, Vey, Sven Naulertz, and Wixit. Thank you ever so much for your wonderful, wonderful support.